what other kinds of tasks can IT pros use M365 Copilot for?
Yeah, so I would like to obviously do one of the things that happens an awful lot with folks that I talk to that are working in operations is simply troubleshooting. You can describe a problem that you're having, describe some different scenarios that are pertaining to you. It's not related directly to Azure as an example. It can come up with ideas on troubleshooting because of just, again, the context that M365 has about you, about the documentation that you use, about the environments that you have, to start at least from a troubleshooting perspective, to give you at least some first steps. Great also for junior people learning how to do some troubleshooting too.
Welcome to the Update and Restart show, the show that checks your career for updates, downloads, and installs them. I'm your co-host, Sonia Cuff.
And I'm Rick Claus, and today's kind of an interesting one. We're pulling back a little bit from our progression that we've had throughout the show, and we thought we would spend a little bit of time talking specifically about what we've done and what works for us to be able to make prompting better, because prompting is the new cool that everyone's using to be able to interact with these AI things once in a while. You've worked with AI, right?
Yeah, your results may vary, hey, but that it really is influenced by how well you're asking the questions.
Oh yeah, I mean, it even brought out a whole new raft of influencers, all becoming AI prompting engineers to be able to go off and do things. But we're going to bring it down, bring it back to normal. So why don't we just stop chattering here and let's get to the demo.
Okay, so I'm in M365 Copilot and I actually want to write some documentation. Like, when was the last time you actually sat down and documented your environment?
So back in my day, we would call that the red book, right? And so the red book was always covered in dust and had all the instructions for how things were set up, but then it was never updated.
Yeah,
so
that's it.
Documentation tends to fall by the wayside.
Okay, so let's get this document up to date. I'm going to put in a prompt to say create a step-by-step runbook for restarting our production payment service safely, including validation steps. So I actually want to create more of a procedural manual so that people know that there are certain things that need to be done when the system gets restarted. But I'm also going to ask Copilot to ask me some questions because I haven't given it a lot of information about the system. So let's see what it wants from me.
Okay. Now, I like how you've gotten, we'll talk about the specifics of what we've done to craft that prompt in just a minute, but I love how it's iteratively asking you stuff.
Yeah, and so it's asking me what platform am I running it on?
No surprise there, AKS for you.
Yep. How is traffic routed through the payment service? There's your front door.
Nice.
What else does it want to know? Oh, is it auto-scaled or managed manually?
Oh,
Definitely
nice.
auto-scaled.
For sure.
This is a production service we're talking about.
And I love how it's coming up with these questions. They're contextual, but you didn't prompt them for what they were. You simply just said, hey, ask me questions that you need more details on to be more specific with what you're trying to create.
Yeah, that's right. And it's also asking me how I monitor this system as well. So just tell it that we're using Azure Monitor. Okay, so I could get it to ask more questions than just 5. Any special constraints or risks? I'm just going to say no.
Nice.
And we'll see what it comes up with. If I wanted to get more comprehensive, I could say, like, ask me 10 questions or 20 questions, but this is a good start. So here we go. Already we have a template now for this production runbook on how to safely restart it. It gives me the purpose of the documentation, gives me some preconditions, and then kind of this high-level restart strategy, and then a step-by-step restart procedure.
Right.
So it's starting, especially with payment systems, where you've got to be very careful if you're stopping them about where the data flow is at in its process, because the last thing you want to do is stop that kind of a system if you've got half-processed or unprocessed transactions that you risk losing.
Yeah.
So it's actually picked up that there are some things that we might need to do there, and then again, step-by-step of what to do to get this system restarted. Trouble signals and rollback guidance.
Right.
So if it's having any issues, what do we need to check for after that? And then a post-restart checklist as well. So things to go and check for when that's all been done. So, and then it's given me some suggestions here of what it could do now. So it could turn it into a one-page on-call runbook, turn it into a Word document, add some more things. So It's very interesting because it's kind of walking this line between actually being pretty comprehensive, but maybe also not being comprehensive enough for what I need. But the cool part about it is it's given me something to work with. So
Right.
I'm not starting with a blank sheet of paper.
That's the biggest thing for me. It's not starting with a blank sheet of paper. You could even supplement this by saying, compare it and make it look like this existing document that maybe your team already has established as their baseline, and then would build off the top of that. You just gave it a blank slate. But the very first thing that we did with that very first prompt that you did was, I like that qualification. You said, hey, ask me any questions if you need more information to make this better. Basically, you were doing the you're giving it specifics, but then at the same time, you were saying, if I didn't give you enough, ask me those questions and I can fill that in. Makes it more relevant.
Yeah, that's right. And you don't necessarily know all the information you need to give it. Like, I didn't want to give it a prompt where I spent half an hour describing what the system was. And so it's easier to turn around and say, you know, help me to help you. Tell me
Right.
what you need from me so that we can make this as comprehensive as possible.
And absolutely, we don't have time to do it on this show, but you could continue to go back and forth in this conversation history and get more specific on different areas specific to your environment. The second thing that you did is you also provided it with context, right? You provide it with context around your environment, and then again, we went back to the questions part to say, interview me and ask me more that you were missing. So context is always very, very important, as opposed to being just very generic. If you remember from when we did the original demos of one of the things with Azure Copilot, I was not specific in the prompt. I just simply said, what can I do with these machines? Or restart these machines. And it had to determine what the context was based on what I was doing inside of my work environment. So I could have been more specific at that time, had a better prompt, and potentially sped some things up.
Yeah, and being specific is very important for the next point, which is giving it clarity. Clarity on what you want the output to be as much as possible. So maybe if you're not writing, I mean, this was very clear that we wanted a restart procedure. If it might be that if you're creating documentation, you might tell it what the audience is, what the tone needs to be, what the technical level of the reader is. So feed in all of that information to get as detailed as possible. And we were talking about it's like asking a toddler to get dressed, right? You never just say to your toddler, go and get dressed. You say,
it's not gonna
you
work.
have 5 minutes to be here with your blue shorts and your white sneakers, and you can give it a little bit of a choice. So you might turn around and say, your t-shirts are in the second drawer, like choose one of those t-shirts. So you don't have to be super specific, but like give it guardrails about where you want it to color in, so to speak. And so, yeah, it really much is like talking to a toddler about the more vague you are, the more uncertain the results are gonna be.
Right. And then I would think that kind of, again, highlighted by the concept of having, here is my initial level of output and going back and being iterative about it. If there was an extremely complex task, you also could have gone in and decided, you know what? I'm going to break this complex down into steps. And then when I was going to prompt it and ask it questions about each one of those individual steps, because it's inside that same history, it's going to be able to remain in context, use all the previous information, and continue to build upon that too.
Yeah.
So that's my last tip, is simply break down complex tasks. Don't try to get it to solve the world all at once.
Great stuff. So in that case, we didn't use Azure Copilot. We used M365 Copilot, which is really good for things like writing documentation. So what other kinds of tasks can IT pros use M365 Copilot for?
Yeah, so I would like to obviously do one of the things that happens an awful lot with folks that I talk to that are working in operations is simply troubleshooting, right? So you can go through and have it identify, you can describe a problem that you're having, describe some different scenarios that are pertaining to you. It's not related directly to Azure as an example, so that's why you don't use Azure Copilot, which is more specific for systems running inside of Azure. And it can come up with ideas on troubleshooting because of just, again, the context that M365 has about you, about the documentation that you use, about the environments that you have, to start at least from a troubleshooting perspective, to give you at least some first steps. Great also for junior people learning how to do some troubleshooting too.
Yeah, I like that, expanding the context outside of more than just Azure. Of course, the first thing I thought of was printer problems. I don't know if Copilot even is going to solve why the printer isn't working when it actually says that it's online. But yeah, we'll always have printer problems. We showed the example of documentation, so that's really good as well. Security and compliance, though, I think is also interesting. Not so much from the context of working within the data that is inside our tenant, but even things like security best practices and recommendations from other organizations or compliance regulations that your organization might have to adhere to.
Right.
And so even give me the top things that I need to look for in my environment to make sure that we're compliant with these particular security recommendations.
Yeah. Another one you could do possibly is reporting.
Okay.
Basically go through and say, hey, based on what you've seen over the last X number of days, kind of give it a grounding or a framing of a time window to have it go off and analyze stuff. Take a look at my support meetings that I've had or my stand-ups that I've had, stuff like that. Summarize the different action items that happen to be there. It can go off and do that as an option to be able to do some reporting back. And then when you have your next stand-up or you have your next meeting or your next discussion, you then have some nice bullet points to go off and work with.
Yeah, really, really nice. And kind of along that lines of preparing for meetings, change management and incident reporting is another good area. And so we tend to write service tickets, especially in relation to incidents, to be brief but technical, right? Because we need to capture the essence of what went wrong, what the signs and symptoms were, what we did step by step, but you're not necessarily going to put that in front of a review of the business or the C-suite. And so even to be able to take that kind of information and say, give me an executive summary version of this documentation of this incident for your post-incident reviews.
Right. Now, what would you say would be good advice that we could give folks that are watching for where they can get more information and play around with prompting? What do you think?
Yeah, well, that's it. Playing around with prompting is kind of hitting the nail on the head. So I think
just starting is your first step.
First part of advice is it's practice, right? The more you do prompting, the better you get at it because you realize what works, what you need to tighten up. But to do that, we've got this thing called the prompt gallery. And with the prompt gallery, you can actually save your own prompts, you can share them with your team, and your organizational admin can publish ones for your organization that they've kind of vetted as being good as well. So the prompt gallery is a really good way to go back and iterate on the stuff that's good and keep a record of it. So you're not trying to go back through search history to find out where was that really good prompt that I made that did that document. So we actually have some good information on understanding the prompt gallery, and Copilot will pop up the URL and it gives you a really good overview on what the prompt gallery is and how to use it.
Right. So prompt gallery has categories, as you mentioned. The first one is just your own prompts that you can go off and iterate on. Another one is for your team, where you can go off and share them with your team on Microsoft Teams. And then there's even organizational ones too. So check out that resource. Absolutely awesome. And I will even do one last pitch from a suggestion for being able to share the wealth, if you will, is think about sharing your prompts definitely with your team to be able to show and demonstrate how you're using M365 Copilot to get things done from an infrastructure perspective, what works for you, and then also that they can go in and learn from them and share as well, because sharing is caring. Spreading the knowledge and the wealth across your team makes you a stronger team, and you're all going to be able to kind of multiply your capabilities by using prompting and using M365 Copilot.
Yeah, and I think we need to see more of that sharing in our technical community as well, because a lot of the information that you find out in the scenarios for M365 Copilot, like triage my inbox or research this customer for my next sales meeting. And while that's great for certain parts of the business, we're starting to see some more specific use cases where it's really helpful for IT pros doing the kind of work that we do.
Yeah. Now, what do you think about all what we just said? We've got the opportunity to get some input and feedback from you. Why don't you go ahead and send us an email? What prompts do you find have worked for you in your information technology role? What things do you want to share with the broader community? Can you suggest any topics for things that we should be covering? All of that can be done. Drop us an email at updateandrestart@microsoft.com. And you never know, you might end up being featured on a segment of a future show.
Let's go to something a little bit more lighthearted and some stories that we are getting from the internet.
Yes.
So there were some great examples about what is the funniest user request you have ever had. And I can't beat this top one, which was somebody asking if the printer cartridge could be installed remotely.
I have one to share that's more of a joke that we would play on people if they left their machines unlocked.
Okay.
This is very typical. We would go in and we would take a screenshot of their desktop, and then we would remove all the icons from their desktop, and then we would then put the screenshot as their background for their machine, and then we would get a subsequent call not too distant from them coming back to an unlocked workstation and try to activate or launch some of those icons on their desktop, and they would complain that they wouldn't work because they weren't really there.
You're mean. I mean,
I
that
know.
will teach people to lock their
Oh,
workstations,
of course, right?
Big problem still. And I think the other one that I really like is somebody asking if the multifunction printer could be upgraded so that it could remove the staples from the documents that they are trying to copy. I would love that feature in a printer, seriously.
Robotics and AI.
I don't think the hardware is quite there yet.
Yeah, but you know, that could be a problem that AI could solve for us. Who knows? Who knows?
Removing staples, excellent.
Hey, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate you. And